Hello and welcome to this video. This video is the continuation of our iterator series. And in this video, all the concepts that we have learned so far, I'm going to tie up in a single example so that it becomes really clear. So we have learned about the dunder iter method, dunder get item methods. We have like several times we have looked upon what are iterables, what are iterators, and what they do for us. But in this example, we haven't seen an example which collectively implements the dunder iter, dunder next, and how that entire pattern works. So I have created a common like a very an example which basically will tell you how that iterators how the iter function gets the iterator out of an iterable, and then using that iterator you do looping. Everything we are going to cover in this example, so let's jump right in. So I have this employee record class. This is the class that we have been looking so far, but I have enhanced it in certain way. So uh, it it has this iter method, dunder iter method, and I have until now I have told that if there is an object which implements dunder iter method, there is a class. So basically, any object instantiated out of this class will have this iter method, which means that object becomes an iterable. So anything that implements a dunder iter method, it becomes an iterable. Then there is this iterator class. We'll look into what it will do to us, but for now, just bear with me. Then what I do is that I create an object of that employee record. Here is the employee record. I create an object out of that employee record class, and then using that object, I fetch the iterator. Why am I able to fetch the iterator? Because it has implemented dunder iter. Dunder iter means that this ER object is actually an iterable, and from any iterable, you should be able to fetch the iterator using using the iter function. Iter function we have seen in the previous video. If you haven't watched it, I will recommend go and watch it so that you gain better understanding about iter function. And using this it, you should be able to loop over the iterator that you have got. I mean, using that you should be able to perform for loop and stuff. So okay, what happens? Let's try to understand step by step. So we have employee record class. It has dunder iter method. When this iter method is invoked, this iter method is invoked when you pass the employee record object, the object of this kind, to the iter function, and this function will be invoked. Okay, if you don't believe me, let me print the dunder active method is called employee record. So I've just written this so that du n, sorry. So let me comment this out, and this function should actually print this. When we invoke this iter function, it should print that string that we have written right now. So you see that it comes right. What happens when you pass that iterable object to this iter? The job of iter is to invoke the dunder iter method implemented for that object, and this is the one. Our object is of type employee record, and it has implemented iter, dunder iter method. And once you pass that object to the iter function, it actually invokes this class, this method. And what does this method do? I said that when you invoke the iter function, it gives you an iterator. So it is returning an iterator. This is an iterator class. It basically instantiates the object for that iterator class, and then it returns back to us, which means that this object, this particular iterator object, is actually of type employee record. So let me print that out. So when I print it, let's see. So you see this. It is of type employee record iterator. This here. Why is that? Because we are returning it from under iter here. Now let's take a look at employee record iterator, what it does. This has implemented an iter method, and now we see for the first time how this next method, dunder next method works. We are going to see this properly. What this next method is going to do for us. Let me remove this. We'll see if we have to include any print statements. We'll see in the as in when we move. So we have this next method. What this next method does. Okay, before next method, let's say we have returned an employee iterator object from here, but we are also passing the reference to the employee names. Employee names is present here in the employee record, which contains these names, which means the name list in the employee record iterator. I'm accepting the names, which is the employee names essentially. And now this self.name list is actually going to hold reference to this list, right? So employee record iterator now points to the list which was present in our iterable class, which is employee record. So the record class, so the iterator class is actually going to point to this list via this names list variable, and it also has this index. We'll see what that does. So our employee record iterator has initialized, and that's what is contained here. Now, what happens when you start looping? Let's see. Once you start looping, we see that everything is printed here. All the names contained in that list. Virat Kohli, Rohit Sharma, KL Rahul, MS Dhoni. It's printed here. But okay, let's see how did that happen. This for loop, when you try to iterate over this iterator, for loop has a machinery running in the background, which is abstracted from us. We don't know about it. What that machinery does, that machinery invokes the next, because we are looping over this iterator. On this iterator, the next method should have been implemented. That next method is going to be invoked for every iteration of your for loop, which means when your for loop is running, for every iteration, this next method is going to be invoked, right? Now what this next method does. Now mind you that we have initialized the iterator names list with the names list, the list of those names that is present in originally in this iterable class, employee record iterable class. It's not, I mean, I should not call it as a iterable class, but iterable is only to denote that this particular object instantiated from this class will be iterables. So this names list actually points to that. I'm just repeating that so that there is no confusion. And now when the next is invoked, we try to get the item pointed indexed at this index variable. I mean, so basically from that names list, whatever is present at the index, which is pointed by this index, we get that item and we return that item, right? And we also increment our index. That's we do. So when you call next, what are we going to get in the end? So your for loop machinery that runs behind the curtains, you don't know about it. What it does is that it calls your next dunder next function, dunder next method. It gets the next item based on whatever is pointed by the index, and index is actually starting with 0. And it will get you the first item, and then it will increment the index, so that increment points to the next location, and then the item that was retrieved, it returns back. So your for loop machinery, that whatever the item is returned from here, it gets assigned to your name loop variable here, and immediately you come here and print it. Now once the next iteration of the for loop starts, this next method is called again, and then it gets you the next item. How does it gets you the next item? Using this index. This index was incremented in the previous, when the next was called previously, it was incremented. So basically your next method, your iterator is actually maintaining that state where till where you have accessed your items, and now what are the items which are left unaccessed, and then it has to every time increment that index accordingly. So it will keep on getting for every iteration of your for loop that you have written, you will be invoking this next method under next method, and every time you'll get the item. Although and every time you call that item, you get the item, it is going to be assigned to your name looping variable, and you can do whatever you have to do with that looping variable. And let's say now you're going index out of the bound. Now let's say it will be called every time, but at once at when your index actually reaches the boundary, it crosses the boundary of your list. For what will be that value? So it will be 0 for first player, 1 for the second player, 2 for the third player, and 3 for the fourth player. And then once your index actually points to value 5, which is like index going out of the bound, in that case, this statement is going to raise an index error exception, and that index error is caught here. And then we finally raise an stop iteration exception. This stop iteration exception is actually caught by your for loop machinery that runs in the background. Now, that is the thing where your loop actually terminates. Your for loop that you have written here, it terminates. It is called by your for loop machinery that runs in behind the curtains. It catches that stop iteration exception, and then it terminates elegantly. You don't have to worry about it. And that's why we don't that's why we are empowered, as we don't use indexing to use to point to every item in the list and then loop and then provide all those logic of like, okay, if index is not greater than length of that list, then stop. You don't have to worry about those logics because it is all taken care under the hood. And this stop iteration, once it is raised, your for loop stops iteration, and your iteration is like stopped, and then you exit out of your for loop. That's the basic implementation. Now we have seen how this next works. It's not exactly how it works every time. The implementation can change often for next, but the only thing that I wanted to make you understand here is that your for loop machinery, if you're iterating over an iterator, it is called every time. If you don't believe me, let me write a print statement here now. So the next time is, so let's say next item, and let me take this. So this should get printed every time your for loop runs, for every iteration of your for loop. So let me, so you see the next item is Virat Kohli, the next item is Rohit Sharma, KL Rahul, and MS Dhoni. So it prints it. And then once the stop iteration is raised, it stops finally. Now there are a couple of points that I would like to highlight. This iterator, this dunder iter method that is present here, it's not doing essentially anything, but it's really important for you to keep it because your for loop machinery invokes this function. If you don't understand, if you don't believe me, again, this method in the iterator class is called. So let me comment this so that we don't get overwhelming. So if we print this, so you see this iter method in the iterator class is called. That's what we have printed. So what happens is the iter is under the hood. Under the hood, your for loop machinery invokes this iter to get the reference to your iterator object. Now, because we have just implemented it, it's not doing essentially because we are not using it directly. What you can do is that if you want to keep it in your function, that's okay. In your class, it's okay. But if you want to remove it, you can do that as well. But in that case, just inherit your employee record iterator from the iterator, ABC iterator type. If you do that, you don't have to actually implement this iter, dunder iter. So in that case, it will work too. You don't have to worry. So now that it's not coming from here, but it works. But if you don't do this as well, then you will get an exception saying that your iterator is not an iterable. So yeah, it actually says exactly like that. Type error, your employee record iterator object is not an iterable. Okay, so I hope you understand that you have to implement this iter. Uh, now, uh, now the example that we have seen right now is also an iterator pattern. It's a infamous iterator pattern where the iterable actually contains the iter method, under iter method, and then the iterator that is returned by your under iter here uh, in the iterable class, the employee record class, whatever the iterator it returns, that iterator contains under iter as well and under next as well. Now, coming back to our original definition of iterables, any function that implements either of dunder iter or dunder get item becomes an iterable, which means employee record iterator is also an iterable because it has implemented iter dunder iter. That is the main reason that we have kept it here. It becomes an iterable so that if you have to extract an iterator that that is pointing to the if you have to fetch iterator out of this iterator class, I mean, you don't have to every time do that. That is done by for loop machinery, so you don't have to worry about it. But uh, the entire thing that you have to note here is that your iterator is also your iterable. Your iterator is also an iterable, but your iterable, which is this one, is not an iterator because it does not implement under next. If that seems confusing, just look at the diagram that I'm showing right now. The thing is that you have your base class that implements dunder iter, and then you have iterator class that implements dunder iter and dunder next, which means both of your classes are iterables, but the top one, which is employee record, is not an iterator. It's just an iterable. And with that, I would like to end the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.